So, hi, and welcome to the Engineers HVAC podcast, where we work to give back to the HVAC community by sharing our HVAC application and design experience. I'm Tony Mormino. I'll be your host today, and thanks for joining us for this live recording of podcast episode 51, titled The R410A Transition to A2L Refrigerants with HVAC-R expert Don Gillis. The Engineers HVAC podcast is brought to you by Insight Partners and Hobbs & Associates, two commercial HVAC rep firms committed to educating and empowering the HVAC community. This podcast qualifies for PDH credits in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, Tennessee, Maryland, Alabama, and many other states. So please email me at the end of this. During the presentation, we'll put up my email address. You could email me and I'll provide you a certificate at the end. I will also be providing a few PDF documents, which will give you the highlights of this presentation as well. And you could always rewatch this on the podcast at a later date. And if you're listening to this in the future from today, just check the description of the podcast or the video, and you'll see my email address there. You can email me for any of this information. So our expert guest speaker today is Don Gillis, the technical training manager at the Chemours Company, and one of the industry's top HVACR educational services trainers with over 30 years hands-on technical training experience. Don, how are you this morning?
Really well. Thanks for the invite, Tony, and the rest of the staff. We really appreciate it from Chemours, and excited to be here.
Awesome. Thanks. We're super excited to have you. And also joining us is Hayden Bland, the VP of Sales for Hobbs & Associates. And how are you this morning, Hayden?
Oh, wonderful. Great to see such a big audience. Don, thank you for taking the time. And Tony, thank you for putting it together.
Man, it is my pleasure. I'm glad you're here as well. And our trusted co-host, Heather Robinson, our brand manager with Insight Partners. How's it going today, Heather?
I'm doing great. I hope you guys are too.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate that. So one of the reasons why we do these live broadcasts is to engage with the HVAC community. So again, please, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We'll answer them when we can. I can tell you this transition is very confusing. There's a lot of conflicting information out there. And Don is what I consider one of the top, if not the top experts on this. So please ask questions. It's a great opportunity. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So Don, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your experience, your role at Chemours, and your company's role in this transition while I get these slides ready for you, buddy.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been with Chemours just over a year, celebrated my first year anniversary July 25th. So prior to that, I taught at the same level, basically technical trainer, senior technical trainer at what was Emerson, now Copeland, for just over 5 years in educational services. And I'm kind of doing the same thing here, just wearing a different hat, moved from the mechanical side to the chemical side. And I'm not going to go through everything, but I spent out of my 31 years or approximately there, I spent about 24 of those years actually in a truck. I'm still a licensed journeyman. Our oldest son, as I was telling you earlier, is a licensed HVACR contractor in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So it's kind of in our blood. And as you all are engaged with the industry, it's kind of who we all affiliate with now, and has become a lot of my friends. So a little bit about me. Been married since I was 18. We'll be celebrating, hope I get this right. My wife went 42 years at the end of this month. Yes. So
yeah, I saw her walking by earlier. You better get that right now.
She would have killed me if she knew the camera was on. So I didn't tell her. But anyway,
there you go. We won't tell her either. We weren't recording that. So. Good. Yeah. All right. Well, I thought we would start out, and we talked about this before, right? So talk about doing a little industry overview, the history, kind of where we're at today, and what's driving all this stuff. So as we go through this, Hayden and I got a bunch of questions for Donna. We'll be looking in the chat for some questions as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, a little bit about the history of refrigerant. I know a lot of you have already seen this, but I'm just going to kind of give you a 30,000 foot view here. So you can see what we've done here over the years. We had the CFCs back in the 30s. Example would be like R12, very high ODPs and highest GWPs. Fast forward to the 1950s, we then moved to HCFCs, refrigerants like R32. Now we lowered the ozone depletion, but we still had high GWPs. Remember, the battle we were fighting at that time was we were worried about that hole in the ozone. No one was really thinking about GWPs at the time. You go where the science is. And then we moved into the 90s. It's hard to believe that we'd been with 410A for 30 years already. It seems like
Mm.
yesterday I was taking my 410A test in the shop room. So no ODPs. We got rid of that because that's the fire we were trying to put out at the time. But we still had high GWPs because you don't know what you don't know, basically, right? Now, all those classifications that Tony pulled up there in that green box are classified ASHRAE 34 standard A1. We'll get a lot more into that as we move along, but it basically says it's no flame propagation. You might hear, no flame at all, non-flammable. And then to the right in the blue box, what Tony's showing there is today, whether it's industrial refrigerants or HFOs, HFO blends. HFOs and HFO blends are going to be a big part of the market. That's where the move is. The difference is you're going to have HFOs, a single molecule, and then you're going to have HFO blends, which simply means there's an HFO molecule in there mixed in with something we may already be using today. Okay. If you want to
Hmm.
move that along too.
So the chlorine was the thing in the refrigerant that
Yes.
attacked the ozone. Is that
Yeah, correct,
why we
Tony.
got rid of
It
that?
was that C in there, that C word there, that chlorine, and this is what kind of sums it up. So what is an HFO? So an HFO, and I teach a lot of contractors like myself, and you only have so many hours in front of them. They're seeing this literally in a millisecond. So you're, on the bus and moving on to the next class. So I try to break it down very simplistic, and I put the orange circle around there. So an HFO really is just an HFC in disguise. And what do I mean by that? Well, you can start at the top there and see CFCs, the chlorofluorocarbon, the carbon,
Hmm.
and then you see HCFCs, the hydrochlorofluorocarbon, and then we have HFCs, which is a hydrofluorocarbon. Now, the reason I say it's an HFC in disguise because there's still carbon in the HFO. It's a hydrofluoroolefin. I put the circle around the two carbon molecules there because the olefin, by definition, is simply means that there's two carbon molecules, and they
Okay.
call it a double bonded, and which makes it weaker. What they found was in a system, it stays together quite well and works performance wise great. Okay. But they just put those two carbon molecules in the labs that basically I just came from at the Discovery Hub up there in Delaware. And what they found is once it's exposed to air or gets higher in the atmosphere, it becomes more brittle. So it breaks apart much, much quicker. The double bond, as it says on the bottom in the HFOs, is quicker breakdown. It's simply that. Everything really has a GWP. It's really about how fast does it disperse. The
Hmm.
faster it disperses, the lower GWP. So if you want
Oh,
to
I
go to the
see. The
next, yeah,
lifetime atmospheric, how long it lives in the atmosphere, basically, is what that's talking about. Okay, referring
absolutely,
to.
yeah, is how long it stays in the atmosphere. Yes. So I just threw some examples up here. Just an example of HFOs versus HFCs. And I picked 134A because we've been using 134A for years in automobiles and medium temp applications also in refrigeration and those kind of things. And I'm comparing it to the HFO molecule 1234YF, which happens to be in 454B and a lot of other things. But more importantly, it's in cars now. Like 9 out of every 10 cars made today has 1234YF in it. Now, if you click it one time, Tony, I believe I highlight, I'm not going to go through all these boxes, but if you look just exactly what we were talking about, the difference
Hmm.
here is 134A, I'm going to say somewhere thereabouts 13 years in the atmosphere as opposed to 10 days. And you
Oh,
can see
wow.
the global
Okay.
warming potential from 1430 to less than 4 on the global warming potential. That's over a 100-year span. Okay. That's what that looks like. So that's the big difference right there. It has nothing to do with anything else other than that. Just how fast can we get that out of the atmosphere and break it up? Okay.
So the GWP number, right, like the 4, it does take into account how long it lives in the atmosphere?
Yeah, this is on. There's different. There's like an R4, R5. There's different scales.
Okay.
Globally, almost everyone uses the 100-year scale, which is the R4, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, I'm sure. But that's what we're using there on the 100 years. There's all kinds of different scales, 20-year scale, this and that. But the standard, for the most part, is the 100-year scale. This is based on the 100 years.
Yeah, and I think the point you mentioned earlier And I think we're going to talk about that. Well, we're going to talk about it on the next slide, so I'm not going to spoil it, but I'll let you talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So, like you were saying, Tony, I show this in class. Actually, this is part of a presentation I'm doing next week in Cleveland. A2L refrigerants have been around us for a long time. We may or may not know about it. When I first started teaching this 6 years ago, at my prior position it was like a deer in the headlights. A lot of people didn't realize a lot of like P-TECH units, window air conditionings, at least in the States, that's all more comes from Asian driven, basically. Okay, so they're ahead of us. They're over 10 years in Europe been using these A2Ls or
Mm-hmm.
somewhere thereabouts. Same way in Asia. So they've already crossed that hurdle. But we see them in things like P-TECH units, dehumidifiers, window units. And again, going back to the car, look at all the different automobile industries here that are using 1234YF.
Right.
On the PT chart, I'm not sure if I'm showing that in the next slide, but the PT chart scale, the 1234YF and R134A is almost identical. I mean, it's just like for like. So no loss there on anything.
Well, that's good. And we have a lot of mechanical engineers listening to this and a lot of mechanical contractors. And I think there's some owners who they hear these things online. Oh my gosh, I don't want that flammable refrigerant. It's important to say, well, if you got a car that's, made in the last, I don't know, 8 years, you probably have that refrigerant. It's been used. So that's, you can ease a lot of people's minds with that. We're going to talk about the mildly flammable rating about this refrigerant in a minute. So
Yeah, and there was only so many slides we could get in here, obviously, due to time restraints, right? So, but think about it
yeah.
like this: when people get concerned about this, the reason the automobile industry put the mildly flammable refrigerants in the car automobiles and is ahead of the residential, light commercial industry, the rest of the industry, is because they're used to handling these highly flammable fluids for years. In fact, if we were to make a car today, if the car was invented today, and when they went to go to market and said, "Hey, we're going to put gas in this thing," red flags would go up everywhere. But yet, we'll
Right.
drive around with a car and put gas in it and drive our families around and think nothing of it. And that's why they can put this 1234YF because of the low flammability up by the engine. But because it's new, people get, anything new like
Right.
that, we have to try to figure it out, right? But in
Yeah.
all honesty, that's why it's there.
Yep. And Jacob just said something about that too. Hey, there's gasoline in cars, man. What's up with
Yeah.
that? So,
Yeah.
cool. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about, ODP versus GWP for those who, haven't had a TV or the internet for the last 10 years or need a
Thank
refresher
you.
like I do
Thank
sometimes.
you.
So,
This almost got edited, but on the left hand side, obviously ODP. I'm simply going to put it like this: it's the hole in the ozone. That's a picture from NASA in 2008. If you were to look at that picture today, you could take your pinky finger in the center of that, or just a speck, if you will. That ozone is almost completely closed. I think if you Google it or do the data GPT chat, you'll see that it's 90-some% closed now. And that's not just us. That's not just our industry. No one's picking on the HVACR industry. Okay. That's hairsprays. That's all different solvents and different things like that. So it's a group effort, right? That closed in. I often think about ozone as just think of that as the sunblock for the earth. Basically, that's what it is. The UV rays, we're sun blocking. It's just a massive sunblock. Moving to the other side of the screen, now that was part of the Montreal protocol, by the way, that we all had to take our EPA test. It seems like 100 years ago now, but now we move over to GWP, and we are talking about the Kigali Amendment. And the Kigali Amendment is simply an amendment off of the Montreal Protocol, because the Montreal Protocol didn't have anything in it about HFCs. Again, you don't know what you don't know, right? So we make this new amendment with the Kigali Amendment in it. It was voted on, passed in 2016, and it has to do with GWPs. And the way the GWPs, you notice the bubble, that what we refer to a lot of time in the news, you hear the term, the greenhouse effect. That atmosphere is getting thicker and thicker. There's always something there, but it's getting thicker and thicker. And you know what the sun is? The sun's radiant heat, right? So the way radiant heat works, radiant heaters, when you hang them from the ceiling in a workshop or whatever, they don't heat vapor. They heat mass, whether it's your body, a table, tools, whatever. They don't hit anything. So it doesn't heat the air above it. I mean, if I'm flying in the air and I put my hand on the jet like I was yesterday, it's still minus 65 out there, right? It's not heating that vapor, even though I'm closer to the sun. But when it hits the earth, it absorbs that heat, but naturally some of it bounces off. The problem is it bounces off and gets caught in that larger than, let's say, normal bubble, if you will. So we're trying to release that factor. That's what brings us here today, because we know the science tells us that some of that is what we're doing on Earth. And again, this isn't just our industry. This is why we're going to EVs, to heat pumps, all these things, electrical, the DOE, all the EPA, all this stuff is involved. You can see it all around us. So that's what we're trying to do. Again, the other thing I'll point out, unlike the Montreal Protocol on the chlorine, that was a phase out. This is a phase down, and we'll show you a chart here in a little bit on that step down, what that looks like. Okay.
Perfect. So the headline here is, used to be about the ozone, now it's all about the global warming. That's kind of driving the whole thing. And I fully go ahead.
I'll point out this too, Tony. The letter P, I always say in class, it stands for potential. It's only potentially going to hurt it if you vent it outside the unit. If you do the proper things and the proper practices, it's not designed to be let out of the system. And things happen. We all know that,
Unlike hairspray, which I fully blame for the whole, whatever happened to hairspray? You don't see that much anymore. There you go. Okay, so what's going on here? This is talking about, refresh my memory, I forgot already.
Yeah, so this is a very old slide. A gentleman named Rajan that works at the Helix Center for Emerson actually shared this many, many years ago. This is in all kinds of different languages now. It was kind of the standard for a long time. It's an old one, but I like to use this because it's a great way to explain GWP, because I had a hard time 6 years ago grasping, what does that even mean to me? I'm a contractor. I fix air conditioners. That's what I do. So this was the easiest way I found to help contractors like myself understand what it means. Now, if you get down in the weeds, a GWP is a measure of how much energy the emissions of 1 ton of gas will absorb over a given period of time relative to the emissions of 1 ton of carbon dioxide, CO2, blah, 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 blah. But what we're doing here is on the far left of the screen is at the bottom of it is 0 GWPs. And then we go all the way to the right. As we go to the right, it worsens up to 2,000 GWPs. When you look at the scale on the left-hand side vertically, we'll see the different pressures and temperatures of that. The gray line at the bottom, that gap is for lower temperatures. And then we have the 2 gray lines in the center. That's your medium applications. And at the very top, where Tony circled that, is your high temperatures, like air conditioning applications, right? So the green boxes are non-flammable, A1 classification. The pink indicates it's an A2L, or a mildly flammable. And then we have the red box there for A3s, which is propane. And then you have the beige one there for B2L, which is ammonia. It's not only mildly flammable, it's also toxic, right? So that's what this is. Now, the way I teach this in class, it's not perfect, but the way I explain this is GWP is based off CO2, and CO2 has the GWP number 1. Even though ammonia is 0, we use CO2 as the starting point. So everything is a ratio of CO2. So let's say, for example, and this is, I'm just ballparking this, okay? Let's say 410A is approximately 2,088 GWP, which it is. It's somewhere thereabouts. And CO2 is 1. So I'm going to use pounds, even though that's not accurate. It's the emissions I just talked about. It takes, 2,088 pounds of CO2 to do the equivalent of 1 pound of 410A at the same kind of GWP or emissions that it puts in the GWP or the atmosphere to affect the atmosphere. So everything's based off. So it's 2,088 to 1. 404A is almost 4,000, so it's 4,000 to 1. But it's all based off that, and they use CO2 simply. Part of the reason is because CO2 is made up of 0.4% of the air we breathe. That's what they base it off of, the CO2 emissions, the equivalence of. Okay.
Gotcha.
If you hit it one more time, if you hit it one more time, and you notice the gray blocks there, kind of gives you an idea what GWP is. The yellow arrow just indicates where we're at with air conditioning now with the AMAC, and that's 700 is the maximum, and that'll be starting in January 2025. And then you can see some of the common ones there at the bottom. Of course, we got R32 at 675, and we've got 454B at 466. I just plucked a few of them out there to show you, and I think we beat that one up enough.
Perfect. That's a good overview.
Yeah.
Okay. So the AIM Act, I've heard of it.
Yeah. So the American Innovation and Manufacture Act, we're going to refer to it as the AIM Act. for the rest of the conversation. And the way I'm going to explain this is this three-step process. The allocation process went in already in 2020 or 2021. Okay. It was signed in September 23, 2021, went into effect. Okay. It was a bipartisan. It actually was initiated or submitted December 27th of 2020 in the Trump administration. And basically what it says is allocations. That's what it is. What's your cap? How much are you allowed to make? Not just Chemours, but our competitors, anybody that makes any kind of solvents or anything to do with GWP, whatever that was. The numbers were actually taken, even though it was signed in September 23rd, 2021, the numbers they're using were actually from like 2011, 2013. But we say it was signed in September 20, wherever we were at then, that was considered baseline. So then if there's a 10% drop, it's off that baseline on that very date, that very year. The second part of this is what we call sector control limits. That's applications. That's the different sectors, whether it's solvents, foams, those kind of things, refrigerants, all those kind of things. And that will be finalized actually right around the corner, October, the second week of October of this year, I believe, is when that's going to be finalized. It'll be completely done and that will be put in place. The last one, we're not going to talk a lot about that yet today. There's been some litigation and things like that, but an overview on that basically simply is this. We're going to get into reclamation. There's going to be some rules and regulations on how we're going to approach that, do a better job of that. Basically things we should have been doing already that they're going to enforce a little bit tighter, and maybe some QR codes and some better tracking devices and those kind of things. There's also talk of refillable or reusable tank. Like I said, that was in litigation and that came back as denied. So stay tuned on that part of it, I guess is the best I can say.
Good stuff. Hey, we've got quite a few questions. Let me grab a few of these here, see if we could get some of these. Okay, so some of these we might answer later, but we'll go ahead and pull these out right now. West Reddington asks, what about when the regulations lower the GWP even lower? Shouldn't we transition back to natural refrigerants like ammonia, GFP of 0, no PFAS, and toxicity can be mitigated with emergency ventilation? What is your opinion on that, Don?
Well, here's what I know about it. I'm not an ammonia expert, but I taught a lot of refrigerants prior to coming here, all of them, including CO2. I taught transcritical CO2 for quite a few years all over North America. So the problem is there is not one size that fits all. It's simply put, It's just that simple. I mean, the amount of pounds it takes for CO2 compared to an ammonia system is incredibly different. Ammonia are a lot larger pipes. You take a very large charge, and then you have to have a lot of mitigation strategies in there. For the residential application and different things like that, like commercial and stuff like, it's just not really practical, in my opinion. Okay, I'm not speaking for everyone. That's just from what I know about it. There's a threshold of like 10,000. It's just a lot of more hurdles to do that. I agree. If we could do everything, I mean, if we could get away from DX systems and just have a fluid run around, that's a perfect world. But that's not really reality right now. Those kind of things. So I think there's a place for everything. It just depends on the application, really. There's
engineering trade-offs to every
Yeah.
chemical, every piece of equipment, everything we make, actually. And we just sat through Hayden and I were in a presentation by one of our vendors about this. And I think if I remember right, ammonia does not like copper. So that would be a little bit of an issue, just a little bit of an issue with our DX equipment, which is primarily a lot of copper, and also extremely high pressures, if I remember right, too. So, there's those things. Okay. Let's see. We're going to talk about Ryan.
You normally see it in cold storage. Not always.
That's right.
But that's typically where that's the world they live in.
And usually massive tonnage systems. That's what I related to. Food storage.
Lots of refrigerant. Yeah. Big lines and lots of refrigerant.
Exactly. Ryan Marks, PES. This is at a federal level. What about state levels? Many states on the West Coast have an out ban on new equipment with R410A starting 1/1/24. We were just talking about that, Don, weren't we?
Yeah. So California has it in place, is the only one that I know, and I could be wrong. If you've got better information, please share it. So as of yesterday, 2 days ago, hot off the press, I think I can share this. I need to update I don't have the states codes in here. Well, actually, we can pull it up. But as of yesterday, off a call that I came off of, in air conditioning, we're up to 45 states that have somehow, whether it's at the federal level or the state level, whatever, have put those codes in place. They might not be in all the code books yet, but they're there. They have been given the green light. On the commercial side, it's up to 40 states. Now, I want you to keep in mind that sounds like, wow, we still got a long way to go and it's right around the corner. But if you would have looked at that map a year ago, I knew, or at least I felt I knew 6 years ago when I'm reading this to people and I'm getting the deer in the headlights, like, and my son's out there, a licensed contractor, and I'm thinking, I'm not even going to bring this up to him. I don't want to overwhelm him. It was a long ways away. In my mind, working with inspectors my whole life in the building department and stuff like that, I thought to myself, man, you're gonna have to, not make the fire departments knowledgeable about this, the building inspectors, and sure enough, that's what's kind of dragging right now. So we're going to get there. We just need to get that ball a little further moving. But it's everything's looking good. It's coming along. You'll have some states that you'll just have to go by at the federal level what they're saying and adopt it, and then some states have already put it in their codes. So, and I have a map that I believe that's in here that I can show later on. We didn't put it in the program, but we can show where that's at.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you for all the questions. Keep them coming. We got plenty more, but we'll just hit a few as we go on through here. So I think this is talking a little bit about the phase down of the manufacturing. Is that correct? I'll blow this up here too. Let's see it.
Yeah, Tony. So this goes back to that first step of the AMAC. This is what you saw there, the baseline in 2021. Okay. In 2022, we saw the first step down, that 10%. Okay. We're down to 90%, whatever we were manufacturing in 2021. That was our baseline. Okay. And this is allocations. And again, this is the cap. Simply put, how much can you manufacture of that GWP, whatever your percentage was? That GWP has sectors, right? So you have to kind of, for lack of better words, pick your poison. Do we want to make more refrigerant? Do we want to do away with this, with foaming, whatever that looks like? And our competitors are all going to have different models. So they're going to have to pick and choose what they want to keep making. They're only going to be allotted so much. The one I want you to notice here is in 2024. That's a big step down. It's 30%. So we're literally going to be down to 40% of what we were manufacturing in 2021. So you saw a little bit of a price increase. I typically don't get into cost because I have nothing to do with that whatsoever. No one really does. As far as the world I live in. But you saw maybe 410A go up. I'll just use that as an example. And the only reason I knew that is because I travel so much, like 36, 40 weeks a year. But at my prior job, I was hearing people squawking about it, the contractors in my classes in the morning. Man, have you seen the price of this? And yada, yada, yada. This is this is the part of that reason that's happening, right?
Right.
So, yeah. So, and you can see all the way down, we're going to get down to 2036. It's a 15-year program. And the AMAC simply put the government has put the EPA in charge of it. You're driving this. You don't know what you don't know, so give it to someone that knows that industry or that part of it. The government, so the EPA is in charge of it. They've given them total control. We're talking about 20 different HFCs that we're referring to, and the goal is to be down to 15% by 2036. So even though it's not a phase out, it's a phase down in parts of this, especially 2024. It's going to be a pretty, sharp decline of what can be manufactured. And that's why, and that third step of the AMAC emphasizes reclamation. Reclaiming, if I can share anything with you right today, if you're in the field or you own a business, get your people trained on how to reclaim refrigerant. It is, whether it's vapor, liquid, push, pull, educate. We should have been doing it all along. I'm not trying to stand up here at a podium acting like how great thou art. We're all guilty of it. We just need to get better at it. Okay.
Yep.
Hey, Don, if we take a step back, you talked about the AMAC with the notice of proposed rule from the EPA. Is that tied to the AMAC? Was it, a direct result of the AMAC?
Yes. If I'm understanding your question correctly, you might want to elaborate a little bit.
Yeah. So with the NOPR from the EPA, just trying to understand, did the EPA drive the AMAC or was it vice versa?
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if I would say the EPA is the only real logical people to be involved in that, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? We didn't sign the Kigali Amendment, like I said. We decided not to. Okay. We had the Climate Alliance for a while. First of all, we were looking at CARB, California Air Resources Board. When we got out of SNAP 20 and 21, which was part of the, kind of duplicated what they were going to do in the Kigali Amendment on an international level, we chose not to sign that. Okay. Then we didn't have anything here for quite a couple of years there in the U.S. So the CARB was what everybody was watching for a couple of years there. All I was talking about is CARB because everybody was kind of watching what they were doing in California, and sort of then you start to see states like Washington, New York, Florida, different ones all start to pop up. It snowballed with the Climate Alliance, U.S. Climate Alliance, up to I believe came up to about 25 states, and then it kind of lost a little power, if you will, when the AMAC was signed. And the AMAC simply mirrors what the Kigali Amendment was. That's basically what it was. We did eventually sign the Kigali Amendment, by the way, but it was after we put the AMAC in place. And the AMAC, I know this sounds silly, but it only has to do with the U.S. It doesn't have to do with Canada. It doesn't have to do with
Mm-hmm.
Mexico. It's simply for the states, so we can control what we want to do. And it might change a little bit off what the Kigali Amendment is, but that way the EPA is in control of that.
Okay, that
Good
makes sense.
stuff.
And we had a good question come in, Tony. So Justin made a comment around, contractor hesitation using reclaimed refrigerant to recharge a machine. Any kind of just thoughts on that?
Well, I totally get it and everything, but in my personal opinion, the only way, as a contractor for so many years, and I was a service manager for 8 years of those years at a very high volume place, without reclamation, you need to start a reclamation program up. And here's why. Because when these allocations start to go in effect and you start dropping down, and it's harder to get some of those refrigerants, and I don't want to come off like the sky is falling, but you're going to see a lot more movement to reclaiming that refrigerant, going back, recycling it, and coming back in as not as virgin refrigerant but reused. You're going to see a lot more of that, kind of like R22 is today. That's basically, it's the same concept of that is what's going to come on. So if you turn it over to you're going to start to see too, in my personal opinion, I feel I'm confident about this, is a lot more wholesalers that you used to not have a reclaim program are going to start having a reclaim program. I'm already seeing it. There's a lot of traction all over the US with that kind of stuff right now. So you're going to have help and things are going to be in place. You bring that back to them if you want to put it back in and buy that, or you can reclaim it. And if you're ever in doubt, just do a purity test on it. Do an acid test or check the quality. It's no different than what we've been doing before. But
From
I
a
totally get the
warranty,
concerns.
yeah, sorry
Yeah.
to cut you off, Don. From a warranty perspective, have you seen any manufacturers kind of reach out to folks like you asking for recommendations on how to come up with guidelines for purity test or process for reclaimed refrigerant or anything like that in
I
order to
think those.
maintain the warranty?
Well, you're talking about an existing A1 system now.
Correct.
A legacy system that's out there today. Let's say with 410A. Is that what we're referring to?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I've never seen anything like that at all with a warranty issue. If there's something out there, I'm not aware of it because we've been doing this for a very long time. And I'd say we as contractors have been reclaiming refrigerant, putting it back in. If you have a burnout, there's proper procedures to do with all that and everything, cleaning up the system, what have you. But you have to test and do an acid test or do a quality check or a moisture check on that refrigerant. But it's really business as usual. But as far as that, affecting the warranty. Now, if for some reason you went and reclaimed refrigerant and you got, POE oil is very hydroscopic. So if it draws moisture in and they tear a compressor down at Copeland or their competitors or whatever, and they see a bunch of copper plating, that moisture is acidic, and then they can say, hey, you know what, you didn't, and then they backtrack and see what that is. So could something be denied? It's possible, but you know what? I don't see a big difference here than what we're doing already today or should be doing today, honestly.
Good stuff. Good questions, guys. Few other things here before we move on to the next discussion part. So will this be recorded and released? Richard Berthold asked that. Yes, it is. There's actually a QR code in the upper left. You can scan that. We also have a YouTube channel. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. You could watch it there. And yeah, so we're glad to provide this information recorded to anybody who wants to watch it. So let's see here. Why don't we move on to the physical properties of the refrigerants, the viable replacements for 410A, which is primarily what we deal with. I think there's a lot of questions about that too. So why don't we move on to that section here?
Yeah. So if you could blow that up, Tony, for me, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So obviously I work for Chemours, and XL41 or 454B is our product. But I was speaking about this product prior to coming here, just so you know. I'm not able to name names, but most all the OEMs that I'm aware of, in some portion, residential, light commercial, are going to be using 454B. Obviously, R32 is out there also, so I want to be fair about this. But just compare this 410A versus 454B. So it's similar pressure, temperature profiles, similar thermodynamic properties, similar material compatibility. In other words, it plays well with others. Similar oil types, compatibility. In fact, the POE oil for 410A and 454B will be POE 32. So nothing's changed there. Again,
Same
keep
oil.
in mind, yeah, it's the same thing. And 454B is considered an HFO blend. I saw an article the other day where, a very, a very, yeah, it was just a typo, but they put it as an HFO. It's an HFO blend, and I know I'm probably cutting hairs there, but it's similar architecture. In other words, the components are going to be the same pretty much. The thing you're going to see moving forward is it's now rated for A2Ls. Simply put, okay, there's nothing that I'm aware of that's really changing mechanically. If there was some talk of some different things of how it was reacting, but I have heard nothing more about that from my sources. And you can see on the PT chart, you have the saturation temperature at the bottom, you have the pressure on the left hand side, almost like for like. And I'm going to get into a little more details later on with what those pressures look like, what those temperatures look like. The big one I want to point out to you here is, because some of this is redundant, is just, you remember how we had to have a reduction in the GWP earlier with the allocations? Just transferring over from 410A to 454B, if that's your flavor of choice, we're talking about a 78% reduction in GWP just on those two refrigerants alone. We're going to get into that a little bit more with the GWP, but that's all I really have to say to this one.
Okay. And just so I'll make a note here, and there's probably a question on this too, but this is not, to be clear, this is not a drop-in for 410A, right? You can't take an existing 410A machine and top it off with 454B, or even remove all the refrigerant and put this in there as a refrigerant, because it does have the different A2L classification. Plus, it would void the warranty, not to mention it could get you some fines from the EPA. So be super careful with that. Not a drop-in. It's a whole new machine. It has to be a 454B engineered manufactured machine. Is everything I say there correct, Don?
Absolutely. Yeah. I have
Okay.
2 slides. We didn't get them in here today, but simply put, you do not put A2L refrigerants in any A1 system that's out there. They are used for just new equipment, the new equipment that'll come out.
Right.
The safety features are not in there. As Tony said, there's no sensors and those kind of things. And if something tragically happens, unfortunate, there's, don't do it. The liability will be intense. So don't do it. This is kind of a generic slide, as I was telling Tony earlier, that I threw together. And basically the red arrow is kind of showing where we are on the low side. That's our evaporator, our suction saturation temperature, our SST. You can see the pressures. I just picked a pressure to kind of give you an idea, because this is a common question with contractors. What does that look like? What does the pressure temperatures look like with 410A? Well, here's a good visual for you. At 117 PSIG, 410A would be right around SST 39.4. Okay. And at 454B, we're right around 44.6. Moving on, because I want to be fair about this, R32 would be somewhere around 38.3. So you can see there's not a big change there in that aspect. We're
no
already
big dramatic difference. Right.
No. We're already, quite honestly, I said this the other day, and well, it's been a few months now at the HVAC educators in Vegas. Honestly, from what being in that fire when we changed from R22 to 410A, I honestly see this an easier transition than we did from 22 to 410A. Not to
Okay.
play down the mildly flammable, but I think it's going to be the burden's going to be on each person touching it. When you make the tanks of gas, you're going to have safety features on there because it's all about liability. When it gets to the OEM, they're going to put sensors, maybe solenoid valves for mitigation, different strategies. It's all about liability. Everybody's just going to cover themselves. When it gets down to the contractors, you need to do the same thing. Follow the rules, get back to the basics, back to the things we were taught originally, and you'll have no problem at all in this. It's very
Yep.
simple.
Because when we went from the last transition involved a major pressure increase, if I remember right?
Yeah.
And that's a big deal when you're engineering HVAC equipment. So Andrew Chapman, what's up, Andrew? In our Atlanta office has a question. Does reclaimed refrigerant have to be sent somewhere to ensure the blend is correct? Good question.
So reclaimed refrigerant, if you're using it in the same system out in the field, like like you would do, it has to be using that equipment, obviously, for that person. But as far as I think you're talking about, I'm thinking you're talking about fractionization and separation. I think we're going to get a little bit into that in the next slide or two, and
Good,
I'll
okay.
touch on that. But if you're sending it back into to be recycled and resold again, and they'll take care of all that on their end. They'll check for the impurities like they do every day. If there's somebody mixed R22 in a system or reclaim, which happens all the time, they'll do those purity tests and they're able to separate that at a higher level.
Yeah, so I think, Andy asked this a good question because a lot of, like, I'm on the sales side and more on the engineering side than the in the field contractor side. So this gets confusing to me as well. So like if I'm at a machine and I take some refrigerant out of it, I could put that refrigerant right back into it without any kind of testing or having to worry about it. If I want to take that refrigerant back to the shop and reuse it in someone else's machine, that's a different process, right?
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
It's got to be turned in. It's the 3 R's. Okay. You have to turn it back in, you reclaim, recycle, and then you send it back out to be bought again, like we do with R22 basically today. That's simply
Same
what it
thing.
is.
Gotcha. Okay.
They'll clean it up. It'll be the same procedure as we had before.
Good stuff.
Yeah. So I put the refrigerant on the left-hand side. That shows your capacity, your COP, your suction pressure, your discharge pressure, discharge temperature. I actually just put this together yesterday. And again, I threw R32 in there, but you can see your capacity 156 at 410A, 454B will be 152. Then R32 will be 171. COP is the coefficient of performance. Suction pressure is what I really like to talk about, especially because I teach contractors most of the time or wholesalers. Suction pressure on the 410A will be 130, 120 on the 454B, and then you'll have 133. Discharge pressure, 429 for 410A, 390 on 454B, and then you'll have 430 on the R32. Okay, discharge temperature, which is key. We're going to be right around 179 on 410A. In a good running system, not sketched in stone by no means, but just where we should be on paper. 191 for 454B, and then 215 on the R32.
So not
Believe it.
big dramatic changes there.
No, not at all. Not at all. ASHRAE safety 38. Now I will say this: if you back up one for me, actually stay on that slide again. I actually put the answer to
slide
my
here?
question earlier.
That's it.
Yeah. So the R32, we saw the hotter discharge line. I'm not trying to beat anybody up here, just factual. I mean, from the mechanical side, you're going to have POE 32 like for like in 410A and 454B. Again, because that higher temperature with R32, you'll have that POE 46. Okay, and higher viscosity for anything that runs a little warmer. That's the way it is in motor cars and what has been NASCARs and all those things that we normally do. Temperature glide, I want to talk about that because there's a lot of misconception out there. I hear it all the time. Yeah, but you got glide in it. We got glide in 410A too, but we don't even take it into consideration. There's no, if you understand dew point and bubble point, we don't even take that into consideration. Now, if you're doing refrigerants like 407 C, where you've got 11, 12 degrees glide, then that's a factor. But at
Right, right.
1.5, 454B, you won't be, that's nothing to be concerned about. Of course, R32 is a single component, so they're like 134A, there won't be any glide. But these are considered near azeotropic. So they're 1.5. Again, I've never taken glide in consideration on anything 410A, and you won't do it with 454B also. What did I want to say here? GWP 466 on the new 454B, 2088 for 410A. That is the why we're here today, by the way. And then 676 on the R32. Okay.
Okay, let's talk about the glide for a minute because I think that's really
Yeah.
important. Again, that's
Yeah.
from an engineering standpoint. From an engineer, I'm thinking of the engineers watching this, right? Because they may
Yeah.
be, engineers got vendors calling on them, and some of them might have 32, some have 453. I'm kind of agnostic to the refrigerant, right? I've been through that. We used to work for a different company, and it was like the refrigerant wars when I started in 97, right? When they were switching over. So I get they're going to hear a lot of stuff. So the glide, when you have a 454B, I want to get the terminology right, consists of two pure refrigerants components, I should say, at a ratio. As that refrigerant moves through the different pressures and temperatures of the refrigeration system, that ratio, if it's not near azeotropic, can change. In other words, it's 50-50 one point, it's 80-20 another point. If you're taking refrigerant out of the system and putting it back in, you want to make sure it's in the same ratio. I may have totally messed that all up. I don't know.
No, I think you did. I think you did a good job, and I think the ESCO team did something yesterday. I didn't see the video, but I think they did something yesterday, and I heard tell from being up at the chemist labs by Dr. Chalk Allgood. They had gotten with him, and he had kind of briefed them and explaining all that stuff because I guess there was concern about fractionization on 454B. So just like you said, Tony, 454B, we know 410A is half of that is R32. The other half is a chemical called R125. You see that chemical in fire extinguishers. The only reason R125 is in there is because R32 runs hot on the discharge line. It's also a fire deterrent. But when you remove that 125, you remove 1,400 and something of the GWP of the total 2,000 of 410A. That's why we're here today. The bad stuff is actually just keeping that discharge line cool for the R32 and also making sure it's classified A1. That's the moral of the story there. When we move to 454B, we still have 32 in there. Now from 50%, we move that almost to 70%. It's 68 point something. The rest of that we put in there in place of R125, going back to the automobile industry, is that 1234YF, that HFO molecule. That's what makes it an HFO blend, okay? With the global warming potential of 4, the trade-off from 1,400 and something to 4 brings that GWP down. We're still getting the capacity, as you saw in the numbers. Everything's working good, but they're both chemicals that we've used already in other applications. That's why I say nothing internally, copper and it's not going to affect anything in there because these refrigerants in different platforms have already been used. So we know what they do. When it comes to boiling points and things like that, the most volatile refrigerant of that blend is going to boil off first. In other words, when it leaves the TXV, the most volatile will burn off first. Depending on the difference in those pressure temperatures is how much glide you're going to have, okay, from the liquid side or the bubble point to the dew point. So if you have more components in there, like 6 of them, and one of them happens to be, let's say, CO2, you've got a lot of glide there. Or 47C has a huge amount of glide, but the most volatile will boil off first and keep boiling off. Instead of a straight line like water boils at 212, you're going to have a gradual peak, and then you draw a dotted line over to when it turns fully vapor, superheated, the dew point, dew SU, and then go back to that bubble point, bub sub, and subtract the difference, and you've got a 1.5. So like the 1234 chart, the 1234YF chart we showed earlier in 134A, if that PT chart looks almost identical, you have very little glide. You have no glide, even if it's a single component like 134A or 1234YF. But if those pressure temperatures are similar to each other, there's not a lot of difference there.
Gotcha. Thanks for clearing that up. And I like the pub sub and do sue. Those are new to me.
Yeah, Dr. Chuck used one. It was Superman and different. That we all got our little, and they all stem back from when we first got in the business. Like, what did he mean by that? So we have to lock that away, right?
Good stuff.
So here's just a glance, not trying to get all salesy and marketing with you here, though, but that shows that formula right there at the bottom of the 454B. The blend components are 1234YF and R32, and it shows you the ratio there, that 31.1 and that 68.9. Okay, that is the blend there. Okay, it's saturated in the tank, obviously. Okay, and by the way, when we talk about fractionation, a lot of people wrap their heads around, well, what about fractionization? What about separation? Fractionization cannot happen in a vapor form, like on a suction line. It can't happen in a liquid form because it's blended. It's not. The only way fractionation can happen is in your coils, where it's saturated at, where you take that risk of separating that liquid from vapor. And I saw the test this week. I was with chemical engineers the whole week. The people that actually invented a lot of this stuff, they took me off every hour or so in a room, and then instead of the touchy-feely in the labs where they do the flame test and all that stuff, they then briefed me on what that actually looks like. They literally got up in front of the class on a grease board with just me and a few other people and went into great detail, because I'm not a chemical engineer. I fix air conditioners, so it's a learning process, right? So anyways, but another fun fact about this, if you don't know, like I was telling some people yesterday, is that 454 series. So you have an A, B, and C, and you'll see those A and C's come out for refrigeration here in the near future, right? But air conditioning is what we're talking about here today. It's the same components. It's still 1234YF and 32, but that ratio changes. I often say it's how low do you want to go? Your SST or your coil, your evaporator, right? You change that ratio. It might be 80-20, it might be 50-50, 30-70, whatever. It's all depending on how low you want to go with that evap. What are you trying to do? Is it low temperature, medium temperature, or high temperature?
Good stuff. I was laughing because I actually have a chemical engineering degree. I can't tell you anything about it, but when you said I was hanging out with chemical engineers for a couple of days, I was like, God bless you.
Yeah,
we're not known for being the funnest bunch, but
chemical engineers, like mechanical engineers, have been very nice to me over the years, and I'm sure they do it to everybody. But for lack of better words, they bring it down to my level. Okay, I'll say dumb it down to my level, where even I can understand it. So.
Well, I even have the degree, and they got to dumb it down for me. So there you go. All right, so let's get to the big, here's the big thing. First of all, just break in here. Thank you all so much for watching. Heather, can you put my email address up? So here's how we do these podcasts, right? We schedule them for an hour. The PDH requirements in most states require 40 minutes to an hour. So email me. That's my email address. If you need to go, you've met your PDH certificate requirements for the 1 hour, whatever, you can email me. We'd love for you to stay. We got plenty more to cover here. We're going to talk about the flammability. We're actually going to show some videos of what it takes to ignite A2L refrigerants, which I think for me, that just sends it all home. I don't have any issues with the flammability part of it at all personally. So stick around for that. Anyway, so we're going to keep going. We're going to talk about flammability, then we're going to do a little handling and storage and talk about some of the codes, and then answer some of the many questions we have here, which we do appreciate. Okay. So unlike the previous transitions, this is different because we're going to a mildly flammable refrigerant. So why don't you tell us, Don, a little bit about that and what that really means and the full scoop here.
Yeah, so it's a third-party testing, as you saw earlier. That information then goes to ASHRAE, and they classified it for the toxicity and the flammability. We're just talking about flammability here. So for years, you had a class 1, class 2, and class 3. Okay. Class 1 is what we're all used to. Class 2 would be an example of 152A.
Like 410A.
Yeah, exactly. R22, 410A, any refrigerant that we used before prior to this new step that we're taking now with the A2Ls. 2 would be an example, 152A. We don't see that a lot in refrigeration, but you do see it like in solvents and automobile things and like that. And then you have 3, which is your propane, your butanes, totally different classification. The reason I left 2L out is there was no 2L classification all that long ago, like less than right around 10 years ago. And the reason for that is because this flame was barely, and we'll show the testing here in a little bit, barely broke that 90 degree that we've used for years, and it has to do with the size of the vial that they use. And I was there, and we went through this whole thing this week, by the way. And basically, and I saw the 90 degree, what they use and everything, but it was so low, they had to reclassify it. It's not a 2. And it's certainly not a 1, but it's not much different than a 1. But the
Right.
reason I like bringing that up is because a lot of people confuse these new A2Ls to A3s with propane in it, and they're very
Not even close.
A2Ls.
Right.
Yeah, A2Ls are much closer to an A1 than they are an A3. Okay, just it's apples to oranges, basically. Okay, so you can see the chart on there, the toxicity and the flammability. I lost that slide there. There we go. And if you click it one more time, so you see the toxicities. The A is the non-toxic. I like to say low toxicity because, quite honestly, even with CO2, enough parts per million in a closed area without ventilation will kill you. It's actually like 15,000 parts per million. You get to the B, then we're talking about toxic. Okay, B2Ls would be like ammonia. Okay, and when they classified A2Ls, by the way, ammonia used to be a B2. Well, when they get classified in A2L, ammonia folks looked at that A2L and said, well, if they're an A2L, then we should be a B2L because it's
Right.
not all
Yeah.
that flammable either, but it's toxic. So that got moved. It was originally a B2 and the A2Ls, and you can see that. So this is the flammability test that they actually did where I was just at the Discovery Hub there in Delaware. So they at the top you can see the blue line. They're adding air, they're adding refrigerant, they're getting the right concentration. It's a corked flask, a glass flask. Okay, they hit the ignition, that electrode at the bottom of that, and then before that all happens, they let that stir at the bottom go for about 5 minutes to get a nice blend. Okay, so it's not a little bit to air over here, a little bit of refrigerant here. They're looking for that perfect concentration, and then they ignite it. The job here is if it stays inside that V or that 90 degrees, okay, that is considered a A1. If it's less than that 90 degrees, okay, less than 90 degrees. And we'll get more into that in the next slide or so. But that's the actual test in an animated picture of that, what it looks like. The next slide or two are going to actually show photos from the booth that we just came from.
Excellent. So let me just summarize it. So we are here right now.
Yes.
410A is here, and we're moving to here on the ASHRAE 34 designation. Propane is up here. When I think of flammability, I think of something like propane, right?
Yes.
Oh wait, is that where propane is? Is it an A3 or
yes,
A2?
it is A3.
Okay.
Correct.
Oh, I
Yes.
got it
Yes.
right.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
All right.
it's K. Yep. Yep. And it's highly flammable. I kind of tweaked this yesterday. I had a large layover for about 8 hours in the airports because of storms yesterday. But back up one, if you would, please.
Yep.
One there. So you can see, go forward. It must be a little bit of a delay. I need the first one that just shows the teeter-totter flat right there. So this is 410A. We're teetering on 2088 GWP. Half of it's R32, as we talked about. The other half is that R125, that fire deterrent or that cooling effect on that R32. Now, watch the orange ball. Again, the charts to the right, we're talking about flammability, toxicity. As it goes up, the number goes higher, the higher the flammability. To the left, if we move from an A and B, we've got toxicity. Now, when we lower that GWP, and I'm using the example 454B, now we remove that R125. Now we went to the GWP down to 466 from 2088. But we still have R32 in there. We've added that 1234YF. Unfortunately, when you lower that GWP, there's only so many molecules on the face of the earth, as the chemist will tell you. There's no magic molecule that will not make that considered an A1 classification. That's the issue right there. Okay. In order to appease the EPA or the AMAC, we have to lower that GWP. Unfortunately, that puts us into a new classification, A2L, but it's a lot closer. So it's a balancing act, if you will, to make sure we're within the lines of everyone. Okay.
Right.
So if we go to so again, that's ASHRAE standard 34. This is the actual testing. The classification less than 90 degrees indicates no flame propagation. An A2L classification means that it exceeds greater than 90 degrees perimeter, but the flame spread is very, very slow. Okay.
So this is when you're saying the 90 degrees, we're talking about what I just circled, right? This angle here.
Yeah, it's that V
Okay.
there. And they're looking for the velocity, how fast, the heat of combustion, all those things. But this is just the flammability test. The velocity of it is what they're looking at right here.
And that's a blow up of that. I got it. So I've seen these pictures a ton of times on the right, but I didn't know what it was actual, I know it's talking about the flame spread, but I never seen it in the container. There,
Yeah.
so.
So
Gotcha.
yeah, so I was actually in that chamber this week, and we went in there with Patrick is the head of all this, and you might have seen him on some videos too. And I encouraged him to do more in the actual chambers. We want to be in a safe environment when we test these refrigerants things. I wouldn't encourage anybody to go out and do these kind of things in your backyard or those kind of things. But you get the gist. This is an animation picture of what we're actually going to see here in the next slide or two.
So this is what A1, this would be like 410A, what 410A would look like, right?
Yeah.
And
So this is
A2.
these are actual pictures now. This is the lights out in the chambers I was discussing. This is a class A1 refrigerant. We stay inside that V or that 90 degrees. Hey, life's good. The world we live in, that's normal. Okay. We stay inside that. Now, if you click it once, you'll see what they saw the day when they tested the A2Ls.
I think there's a little delay there. You should see it now.
Yeah. It's actually got A3s on it. We need to go back one.
Just give it a sec. It's for some reason it's lagging a little bit. So do you still see the A3s?
I do.
Let me do this.
There it is.
There you go.
So now you'll see that A2L at the bottom of that. And you can see how, and I don't want to, here's what I want to do. This is what I do for every class. I want to remove the fear mongering, but yet it's a tightrope. I don't want to play this down where, hey, just dump it anywhere. It's not that flammable. That's not what I'm trying to say. But you can see how minimal. It was minimal enough to make a completely new classification for our industry. Okay. That's how minimal it was. They never saw this before. So now they're scratching their head like, well, it's not an A1. And we've used this for how many years, this testing. And they told me what year it was that they used this template, if you will. And I can't recall it, but it goes long ways back, generations ago, this flammability testing. Okay. So now you see how it broke. And these aren't messed around with. Okay. In fact, I don't have a graph of an A2, but if you were to look at an A2, just visualize that at like the 3 and 9 position, if you will. Okay. That's where that would be. Now, if you click it forward.
So this, just before we go forward, this little bit here, I'm circling this here. I don't know if it's showing up on your end, Don, but just that little bit is what pushes it over to the A2L, right? So
absolutely.
This is what I think of when I think of flammability. This like big explosion here. And
unfortunately, that's what a lot of people's vision is right now. Contractors, wholesalers. I speak to a lot of people like you do. It's no fault of theirs. There's just a lot of people. Unfortunately, what really I think drives a little bit of this is when we throw in flammability refrigerants all in one bucket. That's where the confusion starts. I see podcasts, we're going to talk about flammable refrigerants. Well, then they don't separate those two. It's not apples to apples, completely different. You can see this A3 right here. That's a really, really exciting day at the testing labs when they test the A3s. Okay, you can see that's a lot of excitement there. I also put in the class of refrigerant to the left-hand side. Okay, one non-flammable examples would be R32, 410A. 2Ls, lower flammability examples I put in there were 454B and R32. And then we got flammable 152A, which again, you don't really see it in refrigerants that much. And then you have 3 higher flammability R290. Okay. So it's based on the spread of the 90 degrees as well as the speed at which the flame spreads. That defines a degree of flammability, period. Okay. Anything greater than 90 degrees, it's considered flammable. It's just how flammable is it? Hence the letter L, low flame propagation. Okay.
Got it.
In layman's terms, I put at the bottom, compared to propane, you need more of an A2L refrigerant to achieve flammable mix. And it's harder to ignite when it's burning. The flame travels much slower. And we'll look at that on the next slide.
Okay.
I also put an A1 or an A2L picture at the bottom of this A3. I don't know if you'll skip by it or not, but there it is. I did this yesterday because I didn't have a slide that really shows actual side by side for this. I do with A1s, but I wanted to bring that A2L up there. Here's what we're talking about, gang. That is a great visual because those are actual still photos of the actual testing in the lab. That's what it looks like. That is the difference between hydrocarbons and A2L refrigerants. Okay.
Yeah, that kind of says it all for me. It brings it home for me for sure. So
yeah.
And then the last, I think we're going to talk about this and then one more slide, and then we'll play the video showing the guy trying to light the
Yeah.
A2Ls.
Yeah.
How about that?
So was asked to speak at Chuck and I and Jason Oberts from ESCO, good friends of mine, nice guys, very knowledgeable people. And I was asked to do a three-person panel, if you will, for Brian Orr at his symposium last year. And I was trying to think, man, I've only got 15 minutes out of this 45 minutes. What do you really want to get across to them? You're going to be talking about the flammability, the contractor part of it. Well, you're not a chemical scientist. So I made this slide up the night before in the hotel, and it's been spread around LinkedIn and everywhere else. There are no hydrocarbons in A2L refrigerants, period. Please share that information with everyone, because there's still a lot of chatter online. I see it all the time. And there's only so many, you can only fight so many battles.
Yeah.
This is somewhat generic. I made this, as I was telling Tony prior to the show, that the box is on the bottom of it. I'm not a graphic artist or anything like that, but the LFL is crucial in flammability, that lower flame limit. So in orange, if it gets between the UFL, upper flame limit, and the LFL, that's the only area that it can be ignited. Okay, that's the concentration, that perfect concentration. The sweet spot, as Dr. Chuck explained to me earlier this week, is right dead center of the UFL and the LFL. Okay, it has to have, but it can be ignited at that LFL mark. The lower that number, the higher flammability is. And I'm not beating up propane by no means here. Okay, I'm just giving you a comparison, because there's so misconception about the hydrocarbons in the A2Ls. Simply put, outside the range UFL or the LFL, it cannot ignite. There's either too much air, there's too much refrigerant, or either way, but that concentration has to be right. And this video I edited, but it really shows it explains it much better than I can. So if you want to watch this.
Yeah, we'll watch a few minutes of this for sure. Let's check this out. And those listening, if you can't hear it, let me know. Sometimes when we stream these videos.
A key parameter in determining the actual risk of a gas to ignite is the mixture reaching its flammability limits in air. The lower flammability limit is important, as you need to have enough gas mixed with air in order for it to reach its flammable concentrations to ignite and burn. So if during a leak situation, the leak rate and the quantity released is large enough that it surpasses the lower flammability limit, flammable concentrations can form. Propane is a commonly used low GWP refrigerant in small refrigerated cabinets, but its lower flammability limit is only 2% propane by volume in air. This means that for even small charge sizes, flammable layers can form and actually ignite and burn. You typically need 4 times more A2Ls to reach flammable concentrations as compared to A3s such as propane. Hence, A2Ls are inherently safer, as you're less likely to form flammable concentrations. This means much higher quantities of low GWP A2L refrigerants are necessary just to be flammable, which means there are a number of leak scenarios for these A2Ls that would not even result in any consequential flammable volumes. Another key parameter in determining whether a mixture actually ignites or doesn't ignite is the minimum ignition energy, or the MIE. The minimum ignition energy is important, as most electrical components actually can produce electrical sparks under normal operation, unless they're specifically designed to actually avoid that. If the energy of the spark or the electrical discharge is higher than the minimum ignition energy, then in a specific leak scenario, you can actually ignite the mixture if flammable concentrations are reached. Propane has a minimum ignition energy of just 0.25 millijoules, which means that even a weak discharge, static discharge, say from your clothing, can actually exceed this value and potentially cause an ignition event. To give you an idea of what millijoules are, so say for example in the wintertime, I'm actually shuffling my feet on the carpet and I actually touch a door handle and I actually shock myself, that value is actually 20 millijoules, or almost 100 times higher than the energy necessary to ignite propane. In comparison, A2L refrigerants have minimum ignition values 2,000 times higher than that of propane, meaning much higher energy sources are required in order to obtain ignition. This also means that many commonly used electronic components can be used safely with Opteon XL refrigerants. The severity of an accidental ignition can be determined by many factors, such as reactivity, for example, how fast the flame burns or burning velocity, as well as combustion energy. The higher the gas's reactivity and combustion energy, the larger the potential impact the accident can have on the surrounding area.
So that's propane.
To put that into perspective, the combustion energy of Opteon XL20 is
So I just want to make sure. So that blue thing, that's the flame that's coming off, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
approximately 5 times lower than that of
It looks
propane.
almost like smoke.
In addition, it's significantly less reactive than propane, where its burning velocity is actually 30 times slower.
Once we leave that ignition, Tony, you're adding more air. It puts itself out, basically.
Right.
It's not the right concentration.
I think that was it for this video, right?
Okay. Yep. I believe so.
Okay, that is excellent information. And then we're going to look at one more video of the famous guy from Australia lighting the refrigerant video. Hold on a second here. This to me really says so much about it.
Open our blowtorch tap. We've got nice flow of refrigerant coming out.
So that's an A2L. So he's got 3 tanks there, right? An A1, A2L, which he's on right now, and then he's going to look at an A3. So an A2L would be like the 454B or the R32. I think specifically it's 123YF he's got in there. I'm not really sure. And then he's going to try and light this. So you can see how hard it is to light. So.
Out of the end of the torch. And I've just got a common flint ignition source, commonly found in all workshops. And you can't see really any flame propagating there at all. Decent flame. If I increase the velocity, I've still got nothing. So as you can see, the class A2L will not ignite at all. Now the second stage of our demonstration is the HC refrigerant, class A3. So we'll open the liquid valve, open our blowtorch tap, our ignition source, and as you can see, it ignites immediately.
Okay. Don't try this at home, kids. That's what I say.
Absolutely.
That pretty much sums it up for me. I mean, like, you can't even light this stuff, you know, and as Don pointed out earlier, it's got to get out of your system in the first place, which doesn't, like, I don't know. I guess slow leaks happen every once in a while, but in our industry, it just doesn't happen that often. So, okay. So, I think we got some good stuff here. We got tons of questions. Thank you all for watching. You can continue to watch. We're going to go through some questions here. And Heather, if you want to put up my email address, just a reminder, email me directly. I'll get you the certificate of attendance, and then we'll also send you some PDFs. We've got a few, you know, kind of one-page PDF on the particular data we covered here, and also some stuff that Chemours has provided, like as far as around the 454B and the A2L. A lot of good guides there. We'll be glad to email you. So, Hayden, do you want to grab a few of these questions here?
Yeah, before we go into the chat, you know, Don, when we look at the flammability, what are you seeing from a monitoring perspective, whether it's required by ASHRAE, local codes, you know, traditional building, R410A chiller, you know, you put refrigerant monitors in, and we kind of know that, but what are you seeing the requirements going towards?
Good question.
Yeah, so great question. I'm glad you brought that up. So, so here's going to be my explanation. You're going to have 3 different mitigation strategies: the mitigation 1, mitigation 2, mitigation 3. 3 being the worst scenario. So the larger the charge, the smaller the square footage, depending on the occupancy of what the building is, you're going to have all kinds of bells and whistles. I'll start with mitigation 1 and mitigation 2. Mitigation 2, for what we're going to be doing with 454B and those kind of things, you're going to have a sensor of some sort inside, let's say, the air handler of the furnace itself. That's going to initiate the blower motor to ventilate that thing out. Again, we're talking about concentration. Even however small of a possibility as a flame, we're going to move that through the air and ventilate that. As the flammability or the mitigation strategies exceed, you'll see things with larger charges, like in commercial, those kind of things, refrigeration. You're going to see not only the sniffers, the sensors, if you will. You may see stops like solenoid valves, a pump down, take the refrigerant outside the building, out inside the condenser. Different strategies. And when we get into 3, we may have, in larger aspects, commercial, industrial, you may see things, you may see things like you're going to see ventilation, okay, brought in, fresh air brought in, all kinds of things like that, possibly a sprinkler system, alarms, and those kind of things. So the higher that number gets, the more crucial, the more things you're going to see in the mitigation strategies. But you'll have the whole gamut basically. But the world we're talking about today with the 410A or the 454B specifically, R32, whatever, you're going to see very minimal. Those sensors have not been released that I know of as the OEM. We've been asking for them for a long time, but anxious to see what that looks like. They've been kind of keeping that to their chest a little bit. It hasn't been released. I'd like to get something on a PowerPoint to give you a visual. I don't have one now, or where that's going to pick up as far as parts per million, what have you there. But I do know that I feel comfortable in saying, because it seems to be what everybody's saying right now. And what I've heard is it'll sense the refrigerant in there, depending on the size of the leak. It will then activate. Unlike, I put a lot of smoke alarms and fire dampers in through the years. Unlike those, the blower motor is actually going to come on as opposed to shut down, so it doesn't spread. It's going to come on to disperse that whatever residual refrigerants out there, to make it less likely, if possible, to ignite in any way, shape, or form. A lot of the things you're going to see, like everything they're working on right now, whether it's a compressor or systems completely, it's all going to be classified or tested for A2L qualification, things that might have been able to give just enough spark out or things like that. But again, not a lot changing in the equipment. But again, it's all about liability. We played it down all morning about the chances of this igniting, but seriously, it's all about ignition. When we go to I don't know if we're going to talk about the tanks or not, Tony, what we talked about that, but it's all, whoever touches it basically is it's all about liability.
Okay. And I
Good
want to hit
question.
on a question that Robert Zwick in the chat asked. And my apologies if you covered this. Regarding flame spread, what's considered a slow versus a fast velocity?
10 centimeters less than a second is no flame. Anything above a 10 centimeters per second velocity is considered flammable. It's just that simple. But then it goes into classifications as far as, what LFL is and those kind of things, where that is. The heat of combustion. I've got other charts. I just didn't, because of time, I didn't have up there, but I text one to Tony by phone, just if someone brought that question in on the MIE or what's it take to ignite it. And MIE is just, it's the strike or the impact of the strike. And whether, like, we use strikers on our propane grills every day of the week, on the weekends and stuff like that. If you put A2L refrigerant in place of that propane, you'd be really disappointed and probably be eaten out.
Here's that chart, by the way. So
Yeah.
like the energy it takes to light these things is a lot. I mean, when you're doing it in the test chamber, there's a lot of energy going into the refrigerant, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you can see the red arrows on the right-hand side, and I use this in class. I just didn't bring it up today. You can see the LFL, higher LFL, lower the risk on the top for the lower flammability, obviously. Minimum ignition, the millijoules. Again, millijoules simply means the strike or the compact, the force. 100 to 300 for 454B. That's the higher, the better. And again, I'm not here to beat up propane, but that seems to be the common misconception, that it's propane. And then we have burning velocity. Burning velocity simply means the speed at which a flame propagates relative to the unburned gas. A2Ls are a very, very lazy flame. They put themselves out after the heat of combustion. So we're setting good there. This was something I showed earlier. Go ahead, Tony. I'm sorry.
No, go for it. I meant to put it on. That's good.
Yeah, I just pulled this off the internet. It's not mine. It's just something I saw out there. I thought it was a good visual. On the left-hand side, you see the tanks of colors we're used to,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Getting away from those, you see everything on the right. We're going to an off gray. If you don't know that, you probably already know this by now. You'll see the red band around those. Getting away from colors for the easiest answer on that is the 407A tank there, for example, they didn't want to make 454B or 407A or something, 454B or R32, an off green like that. I shouldn't say R32, but 454B, slightly different green, and for fear that somebody would grab the wrong tank. So they're
Mm-hmm.
going to all gray. If it's a solid off gray color, off white, if you will, that's an A1 classification. It has a red band around it. That will be an A2L classification. We're also going to have left-handed threads on those also, okay, on there. So you're going to have to put an adapter on there and to convert that over back to right-hand threads. And I know that sounds silly, but again, it's all about liability. You know, we
Mm-hmm.
weren't required to do this, and our competitors weren't required to do this, but they're trying to make it as safe as possible. You saw the red stripe or the red band around the tank, A2L, that should be a flag. If for some reason, you know, Tom or Teresa, the new technicians, because we're putting people in positions sometimes they're not ready for yet because we have such a shortage in our skills right now, right? So if they get put on something because they're 20 calls behind and they're used to just doing PMs, preventive work, if they go to adapt their hoses on that port and it doesn't fit, the hope is they'll call somebody, service manager, whoever, Tony. Hey, for some reason, I don't want to sound silly. These gauges, you know, my gauges aren't hooked. Is there a red band around it? Yes, there is. Okay, that's it. So
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
reason that's there. And then there's going to be a different safety feature on, unlike the pressure disc that's on the tanks now, where it blows the whole charge. You'll have a pressure relief valve on there that will, if it gets above temperature, 155, 160 degrees for A2Ls, for 454B, I should say, because it's based on what refrigerant you use. It's based on pressure, on how that heat, you know, how it pressurizes. But for 454B, unlike like 410A at 130 or above in your truck, the possibility is there. It's much higher than that, but we always use the number 125, 130. But for 454B, it'll be closer to 160, somewhere there. And the way that's going to work is it's going to open up like all pressure release does. Once we release enough pressure off there where it's safety, then it's going to shut itself down. Again, not that flammable, but another precaution. There's a good visual right there. So you'll have that pressure disc, that rupture disc on the left-hand side for A1s. That'll release at 125, 130, somewhere thereabouts. Not sketched in stone by no means. Okay. In the
Mm-hmm.
South, they do have to worry about this. In Ohio, I've never seen it happen. But if you go into Southern Florida or Southern Alabama, students have told me they've actually had it happen in vans on very hot days, right? Get down to Arizona and things like that. So on the
Mm.
left-hand side, now we decommission our old tanks A1s. We usually, you know, hit that rupture disc, poke a hole in it, remove it, whatever that looks like to you. On these PRs or these spring-loaded relief valves, there, the ASHRAE 34A2L, that will have to be punctured on a non-sparking device. Again, safety features on the side of the tank, because that's very rigid and you won't be able to poke a hole in that relief valve. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff.
Yeah. So that's just to answer your question. It's really good. So then we move now we move the refrigerant into the OEMs, the equipment manufacturers. Now they're going to put their stuff in place. They're going to, you know, have all these markings. You know, ASHRAE UL is how the equipment's made. ASHRAE standards are how the equipment's installed. Okay, UL is for the safety of the compressor or the equipment, right? ASHRAE is how it's installed. That's the safety features of that. So it's all going to be, as it changes hands, it's all going to be kind of a liability issue. Make it as safe as
Mm-hmm.
possible. Mitigation strategies, those kind of things. Some of it will be internal, some will be external, depending on the application.
Good information. So we've got a bunch of questions here. Hayden, why don't I grab one and then you grab one and we'll just go through them here real quick. So Cody asks, will there be building code guidelines for the flammability potential on the new refrigerants? I think we already talked about that. Yeah, so I think we can go on to the next one.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There will be, and here's what I would recommend for residential. Since we're talking about 454B primarily today, it does have a little cost to it. But if you own a company or a business and you want to share it with everyone else, the PDF, you can buy 15.2 ASHRAE 15.2. is only residential stuff, and you can go through and read it. I bought it about a month or so ago. You go through there, it's got amendments in there and different classifications, like can you use an existing line set, that was A1. Now you're going to keep the line set, replace the equipment for A2Ls. It'll tell you all about those. But at the end of the day, quite honestly, this is the way this is going to shake out. It's all going to be about your local codes. It's going to be your fire people, your fire codes and things like that. So not one size is going to fit all. Yeah, you're going to have, hey, we want you to do a minimum of this, but at the end of the day, it's really going to come down to your jurisdiction, who has control of that.
Cool. Thank you, Jacob. Hey, do
We
you
just
want to
had
throw
a
a
good
question
one
up?
come in? Yeah, so Bernie asked, what non-sparking tool is suggested to puncture the A2L tanks?
Well, obviously the first one that comes to mind is like brass tools, but I don't know if that's necessarily necessary because of the spike ignition. But they want you to use. It's recommended that you use a non-sparking tool. Again, that's just the proper. If you go to AHRI's website and you look up A2Ls, you'll see a little guy in a hard hat. They have a nice documentation, bulletins that brings it out. It's just a recommendation from what they're suggesting that you should do.
Good question. Steve Lester, I know this guy. Steve is our service manager in the Carolinas here. So will there be more strict confined space restrictions for A2L when technicians are working on systems?
I don't have it in here, but again, it's going to go to about the mitigation strategies. Is there going to be a work zone area where sparks and things, as far as like, let's say recovery machines like that, there's nothing. However, if you get into a large chiller or something like that, those recovery machines are pretty large. Okay. And I was talking to Steven Spletzer, who's our codes person on staff, very, very knowledgeable man, been around the industry a long time. And he was saying, but if you get into those large commercial recovery machines and you're dealing with chillers with a lot of refrigerants, you can generate a spark from those that will cause a flame. Those have to be 20 foot outside the work zone. Okay. So you'll run a large, more of an industrial type hose over to the system and keep that over the way. The spark is going to come from the switches of anything in the area, and it's going to come from your cords. That's your thing of ignition. It's not going to come from the motors or anything like that. Okay. Go to your manufacturers and look up it. Just because you bought last year's models, and I know everybody wants to sell equipment, and so do I. Okay. So tools and things like that. Double check. You might find that last year's model, unlike new cars, they don't make recovery machines every year, all the different brands out there. Go to their websites, look at the manufacturer, find your model number, and see if it's already been A2L approved. There's other programs out there with, I won't name names, but there's so many of them. You can bring them into the wholesaler on counter days and get a sticker put on them that they've been recertified. Some of it's just changing the O-rings in them and things like that, or the seals. But really mechanically inside that system, nothing's really changed. And I've talked to quite a few people off the record, and there's not a lot of change there. It's just, but you want to use everything going forward today rated A2L equipment, and you should have no issues in that work area. Now, getting back to his questions about, that area there, again, I have a chart. I don't know if it's in here or not, but it's for the mitigation strategies. It talks about the pounds and the formula you use for the square footage in that area. And when you get into the larger areas, like even CO2, you may need ventilation in that area. But I'm talking about larger systems with much larger charge sizes, if you will. In residential, I honestly don't see that being an issue right now. But I want to be fair about this. A lot of this stuff's new to all of us, especially like these codes that are coming out right now. You have to have someone on staff like we do. I mean, multiple people on staff just to follow the codes because they're ever changing. What I tell you today or the map I show you today is not going to be the same next week or 2 weeks from now. I can assure you that. So we're kind of learning, like everything we do as humans as we go. They're just putting as many safety nets as they can in place to try to make sure that this is a smooth transition, and Chemours wants that. That's why we have an educational department like you guys do. You're out there educating. We need to get the education out there. We're all learning with each other. I learn every day.
Good stuff. Yeah, every time I do this presentation, I'm like, whatever I tell you today, make sure you check back with us in a few months.
Exactly.
Hayden, you got another question there for us?
I think we pretty well covered
You
it.
got to
Sorry
look
if I
all the way
missed
at the
anybody.
top. There's pinned questions at the top. I don't know if we've gone through some of these. Let's see here. It's a little bit confusing, but I'll take one here. Phil Batterson. I read that 454B contains one or more of the PFAS chemicals. Is this the case?
Anything with HFOs. So I'm not a PFAS expert, and we talk about this all the time, and I see this thrown all over. You see people starting to slightly back off it right now. Almost everything in that we have today has PFAS in it. Okay, it's really, what, I don't really discuss PFAS. It's not really my area of expertise, but the sandwich wrappers we make today, plastics in the store, plastic jugs, and all stuff. So I'm going to let the PFAS experts work on that, because when it comes to the refrigerant part of it, it's about as minimal as you can possibly think of as far as the big picture of PFAS. Okay, but I get where, for some reason, sometimes it's driven by industries that want to make it look bad and what have you. And I totally get it. But again, I want to digress off that. I'm not a PFAS expert. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not going to say it doesn't have PFAS in it, because almost everything in it, EVs, computer chips, we would shut down the world if we removed every PFAS in the world right now. But I totally get what you're getting at, because there's a lot of information. Well, it had PFAS in it, but
Right.
so I'll let the experts in PFAS talk about that. We do have some talking points on PFAS. If you go to Optian.com, people a lot smarter than I am can answer those questions and give you honest answers. I'm going to butcher something if I talk about it.
Yeah, man. Okay, let's see. Javier Cruz. Is the HFO 1234YF a drop-in replacement for 134A?
So most everyone in the industry usually cringes when they hear the term drop in, but that's what we call it, right? We drop in, we think. So it is like for 134A, but you can't take 1234YF because it's an A2L refrigerant and drop it into a 134A system, car or anything. You're not going to do that. Anything that was classified as A1, a legacy type refrigerant that we've used always in our whole entire life, you're not going to be able to, no matter how minor we've just talked about the flammability is, you just can't do it. The safety features are not there. Will anything ever happen? Who knows? But you're taking a big liability chance if you do it. Inevitably, somebody's going to probably go out and put 454B in a 410A unit, and as well as I do. But you cannot do it. It's not worth it. It's not worth losing your business. It's not worth closing you down, your livelihood. It's just not. Just don't do it.
It's a big deal.
It is. Yeah. It's like years ago, people would get a hold of me through my prior job and hey, I've had this compressor running forever, and it's rated for R22, but I've had R290 in it. The email might come from Europe, and I've had R290 in it for almost a year. Well, the PT chart from R290 and 22 is almost identical. It doesn't make it right. You're putting 290, a highly flammable refrigerant, and R2, that thing doesn't have. And casing electronics and those kind of things are really key when they make those type of things. So will it work? Who knows? On paper it looks great, but do not do it. It's a totally different flammability class. No, however mild or small of a change it is, just don't do it.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, Travis Anderson, is there a max pounds of this flammable refrigerant? Maybe, I don't know, max poundage per that you can carry in your truck. I'm not really sure. Maybe Travis could clarify that question. Not really sure.
If it's what I'm thinking, Tony, while we're waiting for his question to clarify, why don't you go down through this slide? I've got like a back of a truck, and it's the DOT materials of trade in here that I'm going to show next week. This presentation should see. Yeah, there it is.
There you go.
The transportation DOT. Under the materials, it's business as usual. And same restrictions in place, 440 pounds on your truck, regardless of the hazard. Now, that's not 440 pounds in one tank, obviously, and I'm not trying to be funny. Federally, there are no placards required for service vehicles. However, for transportation, there will be. You're going to have more pounds on the truck and stuff. You're going to have placards like anything else you do with SDS sheets and those kind of things. So, but it's business as usual for contractors and everyday business like we've been doing. Okay, same thing and that we've always done. So, no different change there.
Good question. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so before we go to the next question, Hayden has a hard stop. He's got to get to another important meeting. Hayden, thank you so much for joining us, and we appreciate your contributions. And I hope that you'll come back again on the show, which we'll have very soon. So everybody say goodbye to Hayden. Thank you very much, and we'll still stick around and answer all these questions. So thank you very much, man. Appreciate you.
Nice meeting you,
Thank
Hayden.
you all. This has been wonderful. Looking forward to the next time.
Thank you. Okay, so, and Don, you tell me when your hard stop is too. And we'll just answer some more questions here and see what happens. So with a low boiling point of A2L refrigerant, does it increase the power of the compressor that increases energy consumption?
Well, no. And that goes back to that COP, the coefficient that we talked about earlier and looked at the capacity and everything. You're not gonna, there's some give and takes on all of it, but very, very minimal on that stuff. So it's actually was on all the charts we showed earlier of the boiling points is what he's talking about, and the COP and the mass flow and all that stuff. So it's going to be very minimal on any of that
Gotcha.
stuff like that, and including R32 and anybody else's brand out there. I want to be fair
Sure.
about that. So you're going to have slightly different changes, but it's still the same A2L classification as far as the flammability goes.
Awesome. And some of these questions have been around since the beginning of the cast. So if we've already answered them, just let me know. That's great. So
Yeah.
and for those still sticking around, thanks. Again, this is going to be recorded and will be on our podcast. The QR code's in the upper left, and you can email me for your certificate at any point. So Miguel asks, any recommendations about the tools for A2Ls? I've gotten that question a bunch.
Hi, Miguel. Miguel's a coworker of mine down in South
great.
America.
I love it.
Yeah, Miguel's a very knowledgeable young man. He's wears a lot of hats down there in South America. So, yeah, glad you brought it up, Miguel. Appreciate you tuning in. Again, can't reiterate it enough, Tony. Anything moving forward today, you must have it A2L certified tools, whatever that looks like. The only thing that comes to mind right away that's probably not going to change as far as labeled A2L would obviously be things like scales and things like that. But all your gauges. Now, obviously, if you're using compound gauges that don't have 454B on it, obviously you're going to have to get a set of gauges, even though the PT chart's very close. Most of the Bluetooth stuff is done on apps, and that'll update to that refrigerant if you're using Bluetooth and those kind of things. But everything moving forward, vacuum pumps, recovery machines, we want to either check with the manufacturer's website that it's okay to do that, check if they have a program where you can bring it to the wholesaler and refurb it, or just when you buy something new from this point on. And by the way, even though the refrigerant's just coming out now, it's in our wholesalers now that 454B is. There's quite a few wholesalers that are carrying it, even though the equipment isn't out yet. Okay, these A2L tools have been around for the last 2-3 years now, at least 2.5 years. I know they've been on the shelf. So just make sure you're getting, just like when we went to 410A, make sure you're able to read 410A and the R22 on your gauges. Okay, that's but everything should be A2L certified.
Good advice. If you're going to buy it right now, you might as well get the correctly rated stuff. So
yep.
Here's a question I've been asked a bunch of times regarding working on the equipment, like the implications of replacing. Well, you can't replace 410A. We think this is saying, can you take out 410A and put 454B in? We can't do that. We already talked about that. I think he's asking, why can you not do that? And I would say, because it's a different pressure, it's a different UL requirement. There's all kinds of different things going on. And then the brazing repairs. Can you talk about brazing a machine that has an A2L in it? I get that question a bunch, and I'm not sure how to answer that.
Absolutely. So I've got a slide. I think it's right here after these slides, Tony. It would be cool if we could bring it up. It's a great visual of things that are changing and not changing.
Is it this here?
No, some more. I made these just yesterday at the Sky Club when I was laid over. There's one or two that says what's changing and not changing. So here's no, keep going down. Uh, this is all your. There we go. There we go.
Okay,
Back
let
to
me
the
blow this up.
basics. Yeah. So back to the basics. This is
Oh, this looks good.
this is just grabbing a few things. Okay. It doesn't cover everything, but you can see back to the basics I put at the topic, and I'm sure that, other people have the same slide. Okay. And you can look at what A1s look like, A2Ls. Safely remove refrigerant. We've always had to do that. It's required with A2Ls. Okay. Purge certs with inert gas and oxygen free. They're not talking about purging while you're using nitrogen brazing for oxidation purposes. This was best practices forever. After you cut open a system, you were always supposed to use nitrogen and purge any residual gas out of the system. Okay, before you started making repairs, that's always been in place.
That
Now
doesn't
it's going
happen on
to
every job?
be.
No comment.
Yeah. So now it's going to be required, and they're going to, this is all going to be done. I don't have this all pounded out. I don't know if anybody does, but I know California is probably going to be one of the first ones to implement it. Pressure
Mhm.
testing the systems. We've always had to evacuate the circuits. It's always been best practice. Now it's going to be required. We moved down to leak and pressure test. It's always been best practice. I don't know anybody that doesn't do that, and it would be a shame if they didn't, but now it's going to be required. So you're going to be documented on that. You're going to document
Mhm.
that when you set an equipment. That's actually going to be documented with the equipment of what those pressures were. And think about this. I know some people are going to say, hey, well, what is it? The EPA police out there? Maybe not. But here's the deal. When they're going to track all this stuff. And when you document that stuff, God forbid, if something should happen a month down the road and something even minor breaks out, and let's say a fire marshal has to get brought in, they're going to put those pieces together. So do your work. Do what you've always should have been doing, and there won't be any issues. Okay, but definitely emphasize. Great question, by the way. Whoever asked that, I appreciate you bringing it up. Purge with nitrogen after you cut the system open, and you're supposed to be doing that with A1s already. You want to remove that residual gas that's in there prior to brazing or anything like else, and then
Then
it's
you'll be
business as
safe.
usual. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
All right, let's hit one more question here, and then we'll wrap it up. So Keith Clark is one of our service techs at
Yeah.
Insight Partners. Will 454B be used on EXVs or just TXVs?
EXVs also, yeah, that's a great question. So electronic metering devices will also be used on this. There won't be any difference in that. It'll be business as usual. A lot of that refrigerant, besides the mildly flammable, a lot of the mechanical stuff is from my knowledge, even on the compressor side, isn't going to be. There's not going to be a whole everything you're going to. The big difference right now is everything you're going to see is going to be stamped on it. It's been rated for A2Ls. Okay. But it's really a lot of the same stuff that we've been doing our whole life, really. Like I said earlier, I don't think I'm wrong. I've said this in very large groups. I personally feel I'm going to take my Chemours hat off and put my Don Gillis hat on. I really strongly feel that this transition is going to be much easier than it was with R32 and 410A. I remember leaving the shop that morning when they said, "Hey, on the old Nextels, you got to come in tomorrow. We're going to get trained on this new refrigerant that's going to change the world." And they call it what they call it anyway, Puron. Carrier named it Puron. Okay, and so we went there the next morning. We took the test. They showed us a little video. We took the test. We walked out that morning, and everybody was loading their truck. And I remember it like it was yesterday. Like, I'm not putting that crap in my truck. Did you see those pressures? So we're all over that hurdle. Okay, so just do the right thing, and you're going to be fine. Okay, if you're already used to good practices, you're not going to have an issue. All right. A couple plugs for the Chemours people and Opteon.com team. We got a lot of free literature. We don't charge anything for, if you don't mind, Tony, for Opteon.com. Also,
Absolutely.
we are real close to having and there's a lot of good resources. We're not the only game in town for education, but we're real close to completing our landing page for education. So whether that be by webinars or Teams meetings and those kind of things, or in-person training, those kind of things. But more importantly, go get your data sheets from there. Get the facts. All the video that Tony just showed, you can get the link on there and show it. It is gated. You'll have to fill out, hey, I'm Bill from Oregon, and I'd like to see this, and they'll allow you in to see that video yourself. Okay.
Give me that
but,
link. Give me that URL again. Optium.
Yeah, Option.com. It will take you to all kinds of things, not just A2L refrigerants. And Option, by the way, is the new word for Freon. When you see Option on the boxes, again, that's our brand. We own the rights simply because Chemours came, spun off from DuPont in 2015. Freon was a trademark name for all refrigerants. It wasn't just one refrigerant, right? We all know that. Option is a brand name. Option, instead of Freon, it's not going to be called Option, and it's just the new refrigerants that are coming out that are low GWP. It doesn't necessarily mean it's an A2L refrigerant. It'll just be a lower GWP, because there are A1 refrigerants out there that will have Option on it, and those are retrofit refrigerants. So they're lower GWP to change out things like 404A to get that GWP down. Things like R449, R448, those are lower GWP refrigerants for retrofits.
Excellent. Yeah, and I'll speak to that. So they have tons of resources. Option.com, I believe that's correct. I put it on the screen there. Also, email me for your certificate, and I'll include anything you want me to include specifically for PDFs, Don. Just send them to me, and I'll include it to the folks who email me. And I'll also email you this email address and also the links to watch this show. So I think this is a great note to end it on. And thank you so much, Don. If you could hang out for a few minutes, I'll play the outro here, and we'll let people kind of leave us. And thank you so much for watching. We totally appreciate everyone who comes here and watches these shows. It's amazing. And Don, you were a great guest. I hope you'll come back and help us keep on track with all this stuff. So
thank you, Tony, for so much. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.